The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Good morning, everyone. So this is our last Sunday Ango talk of the season, of the Eightfold Path to Living in the Buddha Way. It was called The Path until the Dharma went to China, where in attempt to meet Chinese language and concepts, it became the Way, borrowed from the Taoist way. So the Buddha Way and the Buddha Path are the same way. Our focus today are the last two elements of the path, mindfulness and concentration. Liberative mindfulness and liberative concentration. I like that the best. So they're closely linked, obviously, closely linked explorations of what awareness is, how to practice it, and to what end. Explorations of what it is that is seen, and then explorations of how to live in accord with the reality you've perceived and experienced. So mindful awareness and liberative concentration are like our left and right hands supporting each other, working together, helping each other bloom. So even if you're dominantly right-handed, you need your left hand to hold something while your right hand does it. And if you happen to be ambidextrous, well, then you can do both and get confused in the process as they tangle out which hand is going to do what. They work together. And these two, mindfulness and concentration, double back through the other 6 elements of the path. And because each of the 8 elements informs all the others. And more than that, each of the elements is made of all the others, which is a good way to remember that it's not a consecutive or hierarchical or ladder or stepping stones, because each is made of the other. It's a circulating event. So mindfulness is usually described in terms of meditation, but of course it's woven throughout our entire life, our entire day. What we call liberative mindfulness is being present and aware of the truth of life. It's insight into Dharma, insight into life, insight into suffering in all our activities. So it's a mindfulness that rests in or is grounded in the reality of life. And yes, that, since we always have a filter or focus because we have to sort of make sense of things, that is the most basic pattern or filter you can apply. That's why we call it right view. And so then you, with this liberative mindfulness, you see, you look and you explore both what is the reality of life and in terms of that reality. And the same is true of liberative concentration, of course. It's part of our whole life and it informs our whole life. It's not just something that happens when we're doing a seated meditation. Because the Dharma is present everywhere, always. It's how things really are. So it's never absent. It's where we live and it's who we are. But it's unrealized or unactualized in most of our life. So we have great gifts, capacities for love, for wisdom, for insight, for creativity, for community. And because we have minds that invent and create and choose, we have commensurate burdens or problems, the capacities for greed, hatred, and delusion. So while we are always in the Dharma world, we are rarely aware of that, let alone living in accord with that reality because of our mind's creative capacity to invent. A great gift, a great burden. Our unawareness of reality, of how things are, is what we call ignorance. And it's not a passive thing, unawareness or ignorance. It's a, however, unconsciously choosing to see our story rather than reality. Our ignorance, our unawareness of reality means that we rub up against reality as though it were a rough rock. And then, as we're a little battered and bruised, we think it's reality that's the problem. So we tend to live not only not in sync with reality, but contrary to it. We essentially wind up opposing reality, opposing our best interests. And all of this opposing our best interests, in fact, all of the unawareness, all our discord, all our crashing against reality, all our messy ideas, these are dukkha. And dukkha is usually translated as suffering to emphasize the painfulness of it. But it's a range, it's a whole wide, all the way from the chronic dissatisfaction coming from having wishes and expectations that about a world that doesn't really exist, to impulsive action, to willful harm, to acute suffering over loss. All of them are rooted in our mixed up views of our reality, ourselves, and each other. There was an earlier translation of the Heart Sutra that we used in Minneapolis, in which it spoke of our upside down views. Our deluded views are upside down views. If you live upside down long enough, you don't know you're upside down. Looks like up to me. Now, as far as we know, foxes and redwoods don't have this problem of dukkha, but that's only as far as we know. But of course, they experience physical suffering. But dukkha is a kind of suffering that's mostly, not uniquely, but mostly ours. You know, when we see that orcas and whales mourn their dead and return to the site of the death of a close member of their group. And many animals show anxiety. You know, there are a lot of feelings and emotions expressed in animals once you start looking closely. And so some sense that suffering extends through many other creatures as well. But it's primarily ours. And so all of our contrary actions, in thought, in word, in deed, make up this kind of suffering called dukkha. And when we rail against this suffering, as we do naturally, we forget that all of this suffering is intimately connected to our gifts. And so with this vast and burdensome problem of suffering and ill action and harm, we need an antidote. And the Eightfold Path and each of its elements is an antidote to dukkha. That is the point of it. Since dukkha is based in unawareness, our awareness and our aware actions and our awareness of reality, which is what the Eightfold Path cultivates in so many ways, this is the antidote to dukkha, to ignorance and suffering. And this antidote to our deep and widespread suffering starts with awareness. In a way, you know, the first two elements of the path, right, as we call right view, right intention, are the underpinnings. And then we have 4 elements that are our daily world of life and action, of speech and action, so forth, livelihood. And then the last 2, mindfulness and concentration, sort of bracket on the other side, the set of 8. In a way, they echo the first 2. So awareness is certainly not mindfulness, not enough on its own to truly alleviate, let alone end suffering or free you from it. But it is a sine qua non, it is essential. In fact, of course, every single element of the path is essential. Not to say that there's a sacredness about 8. You can have a path of 7 or 9 or 12. Just as the perfections, the paramitas come in sets of 6 and 10, and I believe 12. So awareness is essential. Awareness of what? That's why we have right view and right intention guiding this awareness. It's awareness of interdependence, without which our kindness is very limited and goes astray and does harm as often as not. And awareness of impermanence, without which we can't help but grasp and cling and be greedy, seeking a solidity that doesn't exist and actually would not help our lives if it did exist. And how do we develop awareness? Through paying attention, through attending to all your actions and their impacts. So mindful awareness, we often link the 2. The Buddha said, be mindful and aware. They're not identical. Mindfulness brings us into awareness of ourself, our field of experience. It is, this I see. Oh, this I am curious about. This puzzles me. This I don't understand. This, as it is, without the overlay of my opinions and biases and beliefs and attitudes. And as we see and drop these biases and opinions and attitudes, we open to reality. So mindful and aware are so close. Maybe they're twins almost, who are of course different. So in mindful is know what you are doing, what you are thinking. It gathers you together as one person to be mindful. And then when mindful gathered together, you can be aware of what is going on, both around you and inside you. So you could summarize the whole Buddha way as be aware, be accountable, be kind. And truly, if you were a Buddha, you wouldn't have to add the be kind, because it's a hallmark of a Buddha that a Buddha's actions are awake, completely awake, and therefore are always kind, because in awakeness to the reality of life, kindness or compassion is what is the shape of actions naturally. But since we're not that kind of Buddha, we're 1-inch Buddhas, we need to remind ourselves specifically of kindness and of that as a factor in all our actions. So this says, be aware of how things really are. Be aware of your thoughts and actions. Be aware of their consequences. And be accountable, because your actions and their impacts matter. So take responsibility for them. Act in accord with the Dharma you're aware of. And then kindness is the natural result. We think we're always aware of what's going on, but that, of course, is one of our most dangerous illusions. We're always aware of something. And so we mistake the something we are aware of for what there is to be aware of. We look with biased eyes and using filters that are at best only half conscious, mostly quite unconscious. And so what we think of as being present and aware usually means aware of the story I'm weaving in my mind. Without mindfulness linked to awareness, you can't pay attention to the Dharma. And to your attention to other things is easily mired in clinging and kind of distraction and confusion. So we counter this, our common filter that we've developed over the years of seeing everything as solid and stable and suitable to be desired and clung to and amassed. We counter this by seeing the elements of these things that we think of as solid, and by seeing their ephemerality, by seeing with Dharma eyes. And so mindfulness or mindful awareness involves seeing things in their emptiness. And there too, suddenly we have another story, filter, idea that rises up, that emptiness must mean has something to do with being hollow or even non-existent. And it's not. That's one of our ideas based on our usual idea that everything is kind of solid. Emptiness is seeing everything as arising and passing away, as it is. Seeing everything as compounded, not unchangingly one way, not solid. With mindful awareness, the Dharma of impermanence isn't scary. It's sometimes painful, but it isn't scary because it's the natural flow of things. And in a sense, then, deeply reassuring. So mindful awareness is paired with concentration, the eighth element of the path. Concentration inclines us toward, or concentration practices incline us toward calmness and focus. They're sometimes even called serenity meditation. So in traditional concentration meditations, you focus on one object, maybe a candle, maybe a breath, maybe the Buddha in the Thangka or in a statue. In a settled posture, bringing your mind gently back to the object when it wanders. And the most pared down of these concentration practices is following the breath, which can also be done as an insight practice where you're analyzing it. But as a concentration practice, we are attending to the follow and the flow of the breath, which brings you into awareness of your body, which we so often forget, and is a flow experience. So it is a very special kind of practice. And that's waving at something. Me? No. So concentration initially feels good, settling, calming. And then worries and passions and regrets come rushing up. And we feel we're no good at concentration. We let that go, both the regrets and the passions and this idea that we're not good at it, and return our mind to that concentration object. And as we learn to do that without adding frustration at our lack of progress, we have a big achievement. There was a Vipassana teacher who said years ago, I think in one of his books, I really liked it, he said that in 20 years of Vipassana practice and becoming a teacher and being a teacher for some time, really what he had learned was not to kick himself in the shins every time he was distracted and had to return. That dropping our judgment, our judgmentalism is huge. And it's not only for your meditation practice, it's huge throughout your life. And this is one of the places where we're not going to go around doing a concentration meditation on a focus through the day, because we'll lose track of what else is going on. But that learning to drop that judgmental attitude when we don't fulfill our expectations, that's huge for our whole life. So concentration, like mindfulness, is not only a meditation practice. It connects us to the world and it connects us to our own life. Helps us live well in all that we do. So concentration meditation is traditionally called samadhi. Samadhi literally means to establish and make firm. So samadhi is to establish and make firm your seat in zazen and your footing in your life. So there are many other forms of concentration. Preparing a talk, lots of concentration. Cooking, running, and they may lead to feeling settled and calm. They are positive forms of concentration. And then there are other forms of concentration, like gambling or gaming, that might leave you feeling overwrought. So concentration is an attitude toward what we're doing. It isn't necessarily, certainly isn't necessarily samadhi. It isn't necessarily helpful or harmful. Samadhi is a state of concentration or a practice of concentration in the Dharma. Concentration based in how things really are. It's collected, focused, and aware in the midst of a reality that is endlessly moving and changing and interweaving. So samadhi is central to Dharma practice because it is an experience of the reality of life. Even if it feels momentary to you, that's fine. All of our experience is actually momentary. But that momentary experience of feeling settled in the reality of life is something that can then perfume or inform the rest of your life. Samadhi is so central to Dharma practice that it's described as one of three legs of a practice tripod: Shila, precepts; Samadhi, concentration; and Vimoksha, liberation. Katagiri Roshi used to offer incense, saying Shila, Samadhi, Vimoksha, incense, and then offer it to all Buddhas. So it's a gathering of three very important qualities. And there's another three-legged stool in the Dharma of Shila, precepts, Samadhi, and Sangha, because Sangha is an absolutely important aspect of Dharma. You cannot fulfill the Dharma in isolation because you can't live in isolation, let alone grow. And so samadhi has a big, if often unnoticed, impact throughout our life because of it being this direct experience of reality. And which we also learn not to feel that it's wrong or to be downhearted that we don't have some constant deep experience of reality. Then we also recognize, oh, the same holds true of happiness. You might have an ongoing contentment, but happiness is a kind of a up and down kind of an experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's natural. So our Soto form of meditation, which we call just sitting or shikantaza, is a samadhi practice. The just means nothing but, or wholehearted. Nothing but being here and now in what you're doing, sitting. And unlike traditional concentration practices, just sitting has no particular object singled out or separated from the totality. And so it can feel vague, but at the same time, it is that direct experience of reality, not just of a narrow sliver of it. It's an inclusive practice. So it's completely beyond our judgment of we're doing it well or poorly. Those are really not relevant. They're just our opinions. So our zazen, shikantaza, just sitting, We can call it a samadhi practice, but actually it's a combination of mindful awareness and concentration. This was something that Katagiri Roshi pointed out, that it's a combined practice of both together. We sit mindful and aware, or with mindful, compassionate awareness, making the whole of the moment our object. And we concentrate, aiming at being very present, focused on what is before us, which is life and this moment. Returning to concentration on this here now when we realize we've drifted off. Aiming always to see into the basic truths of life and to live in terms of them. So this is our just sitting kind of samadhi. A little bit of a tickle here. So is samadhi the goal? It's the last of the 8 elements, but it's a circular path or a cycling path. So it has no beginning and no end. Samadhi is not, if there is a goal, it's not samadhi, but wisdom. And wisdom, luckily, you see, is big enough and loose enough that you can't really make it a goal because it doesn't have a specific there. It's the whole. So it's a good aim and it's a good practice, but it's not exactly a goal, but we tend to think of it as a goal. Wisdom and its enactment, which we call compassion. Where there is wisdom, the action out of wisdom is compassion. If there isn't, that wisdom is incomplete. Not only because it isn't expressing its compassion, because the action, the compassionate action, then informs our wisdom. They're completely interwoven. They're inseparable. Wisdom and compassion are each incomplete without the other. So don't imagine some perfect samadhi as the culmination of the way. Because all 8 elements of the path work together toward wisdom and compassion. And none of these elements or practices is complete on its own. And this synergy of elements working together, creating one whole, this runs through the entire nature of things in the Dharma world. And that synergy runs through your life, helps you toward one whole life. They say the Dharma of nothing separate from anything else, so that everything is influencing and interweaving with everything else, helps you move toward a sense of wholeness. So wisdom, compassion is where we understand fundamental reality, perceive this inclusive reality. So it's not just an intellectual understanding, it's perception, and live and act in terms of this reality. And of course, as I often point out, an essential aspect of wisdom is seeing into ignorance, not ignoring ignorance. It's a dangerous double negative there, to ignore ignorance. So wisdom is seeing ignorance and seeing through it, seeing beyond it clearly to see what is. And it relies on mindful awareness. It relies on concentration, samadhi. It relies on compassion. It relies on right view and right intention. Ignorance is very deep. It's very close to the root of human consciousness. Seeing me versus you. And of course, privileging me over you. Seeing me as the center. Seeing things as solid. Seeing their accumulation as satisfying. All of that. This is ignorance. It's so powerful. And it covers over the true nature of things and substitutes a false but very compelling narrative. So we need all 8 elements of the path to deal with ignorance. so that it doesn't smother our experience. I think whenever we feel our experience of life to be dry and constricted, that we could just take that, if we could think of it at the time, as a sign that we are caught in ignorance, that we've gotten caught in the backwash of a false narrative that has left us in this unfortunate, hungry, or starving kind of place. It takes the depth of the combined elements of the Eightfold Path to deal with ignorance. And so the point, not only of mindfulness and concentration, but of the whole Eightfold Path, is aiming to be fully present, vowing to live in terms of reality now, to see through ignorance, and to continue, the vow to continue in this. It's not an incremental practice. So we don't, in a sense, get better at it, but in a sense we do, because each moment, who we and what we are at that moment is made of all that we have lived. So all of the practice we have lived, all of the insight and seeing through ignorance and finding compassion that we have lived, that informs our present moment now. But you can't just coast on it or count on it, because today's action is today's action. All our actions, based in our vow to awaken with and for all beings, are all about aiming to inhabit this full, whole moment with wisdom, with love, aiming to live by the Bodhisattva vow. And the wonderful thing about this being such a circulating Dharma and circulating practice is that wherever you pick it up, there's the whole. You can practice the whole of the Dharma anywhere you pick it up and be informed by the rest of it and by the rest of your Sangha. Thank you. So, comments, questions, thoughts, reflections?
Hi, Jisho, it's Craig.
Hi, Craig. Yeah, I noticed you were there. Nice to see you.
Thank you, likewise. So I'm curious how your experience of the Eightfold Path has changed over your long, many years of practice. Any kind of reflections on your own experience of it?
I tend, in my conscious awareness, to think more in terms of the six perfections, frankly. Although early in my teaching career at Stone Creek, I did a lengthy study group and series of talks on the Eightfold Path, and that was really when I found it as a Zen practice. What it mostly pointed out to me, and does still, is that all my actions are the path, are the material of the path, and are the ground and material or content of awakening, of mindfulness, and of ignorance. So it was a way to see, it was a way for me to learn not to privilege formal practice over daily life, because it's so clear about your speech, your actions, your livelihood, and that was very important to me because I tended to live with my head in the clouds.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of practice, is that you engage in this formal, this lens of Soto Zen, and then find yourself returned to just what do you do when you wake up, and how do you eat breakfast, and do you look at people walking down the street, and how do you close doors? That ends up, and then the formal thing kind of, it's there, but it's not the crucial thing it was in the beginning.
Yeah. And it was so crucial in the beginning for the first, I don't know, 10 or 20 years beginning. It was what I was focused on.
Right.
And so it took me a while. So the Eightfold Path was, when I started teaching, was really a very important way to start opening that out. So was teaching itself, because the people who come to the Zendo had life concerns, and they wanted to be related to them. And so the Sangha, actually, in many ways, that's why I say Sangha is one of the great precious foundations of practice. The Sangha taught me a lot, and still continues to, about what practice is and what it can be and how it can inform our whole life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Jisho. Thanks for your talk. What just immediately comes up to me is that, and what attracts me to Buddhist practice is in encountering these large concepts of dukkha, wisdom, emptiness, the things that are difficult to kind of wrap my head around, or it just seems to be too much, at some point of encounter. And so I really appreciate the comment you made that you really can start anywhere, because I tended to feel like I can't do this. It's just too big. I don't understand it. It's overwhelming. And yet I found that just the fact that the practice is to sit down and start wherever you are is so important. And I tend to get lost in that and think and get overwhelmed, and to really realize that, it's okay. Just start, wherever. So thank you.
So if you see the first element of the path as right view, it sounds like I need to understand before I get started, right? But the first understanding is that I don't understand. That's an essential understanding. It's an essential aspect of right view is I don't know. I don't understand. Remember, I think it was a Korean teacher whose central teaching was don't know mind. Don't know is a really powerful thing, because we assume that we know, or that we don't understand, and that's a problem. What that we don't understand and don't know is just where we are. And that's where we start. And we start with any aspect of the perfections or the path or the Eightfold Path. Yeah, thank you for that. Hi, Mary.
Hi. I wanted to bring up an actual situation in light of all of this, which is our Sangha member, Barry Mason, just ended her life.
Oh, I didn't know.
She was with Chris Fortin's Tuesday night group, and I think she had a diagnosis of cancer, and I think that I'm not sure if she was currently in pain, but I think that the prospect of pain may have entered into that. It's very difficult to know. But it was a really big step.
Yes.
To do that. And I don't know much about it, how and so on and so forth. She was just found. But I wanted to bring forward something like blessings, and it's so interesting because I don't know what the path of death is. It's as mysterious as the path of life. But if there's a way to connect loving kindness to her now on that path in death, I wanted to invite anybody to do that. And I am doing that. Whenever I think of her, I stop, I pause, and I send her blessings. And if anybody else knew her, or if just through the Dharma connection would like to do that, I'm just, it's a form for me of helping.
It's a way of having a positive connection to this very painful time. So yes, let's definitely put Barry on our memorial list. Must have been, it was back at Regal, I believe, that Barry practiced with us, maybe not past that. So it's quite a while ago, but she was part of the Sangha for some years.
Yeah.
A lovely person.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that, but clearly life wasn't easy for her to begin with. And she struggled, and one struggle, we don't know what the conditions were, but certainly we wish her well. And it's not ours to even understand it, except to accept that it's what happened, and it's indeed sad.
She was a long time connection for me, dating back to our time at Zen Center in San Francisco, where I think she started to, I'm not sure exactly, but I think she started practice there.
And I just want to add, she stayed in touch with some of us through different issues that she was connected to, social action of different kinds. And so I had contact even when she wasn't, part of participating at the Zendo actively, but she reached out in many ways. Yeah.
Right.
So
She had
sorry.
an social activist conscience and activism. That was an important part of her life, I know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Mary. Well,
Thank you, Mary.
I'll put her on my altar. That's the thing I like to do with someone. Sometimes it's someone I know, sometimes it's someone you hear about who was attacked somewhere else. I put their name on my altar for a while, so that when I light incense and candles, I'm remembering them, bearing them in mind and in heart. Thank you. Are there any other comments and reflections? Okay, so perhaps we best now time to go to our Bodhisattva vows, which I never tire of because I always need them.
Right, the vows are in the chat. Four great Bodhisattva vows. Means are numberless. I vow to study them. Dharma gates are delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.